Hi everyone, and welcome back to Advancing with Watercolor. I'm Gary Tucker. I'm showing you a few images from Tuscany or areas around Tuscany. These images I'm using as subject matter for my ongoing online classes. You can read more about these in the description below. In any case, this session is focused on edges and how we use technique to create soft edges, hard edges, and lost and found edges, as well as rough edges. This is important to the watercolorist because each technique requires a different sequence. Today we're going to focus on using these edges to create a scene of Tuscany, a simple scene featuring a green door. So let's head over to the watercolor table and get started. Doorway in Tuscany. Very modest scene, but something very striking about the way nature's partnered with architecture and like gardener's skill to give us something, a composite that's really beautiful. So I'm sketching in the doorway, looking at that overhead, climbing rows. I think that'll be okay. Okay, so sequence. Yes, a little bit of color here, a little gray here. And I want to prepare for the roses by putting on a bright color initially. Bright green and yellow and of course the red. And following that with shadow colors. So I'm going to start with some light washes behind, a light wash into the doorway, medium strength dark here, and we'll add the roses at the same time. Then we'll be ready to paint our shadows. So let's put out some color. I'm going to use a couple colors here. I have some, this is a unique red, French vermilion, made by Sennelier. This is my yellow ochre. Put out some French color. A little bit of ultramarine blue. Cadmium orange red, yes. Put some of that out as well. Cobalt turquoise. I like this color, thinking to use it in the doorway. So these three are really my exotic colors. The others are pretty standard for me. Burnt sienna, sepia, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow there. I'm going to use a wide brush to get started. My gray. It'll be helpful to see the door first, I think. So I'm going to mix up the door color. Move all this gray over here. Beautiful grays. And I need some paper towel. And I'm going to start by taking a little bit of white and my cobalt turquoise. The white grays it a little, makes it a little brighter, a little less flashy, which I think for this weathered door is just about right. And then, yes, I'm going to just paint some of this color on here. And notice the gradation going from a little darker to a little brighter through here. So I'm trying to make that gradation. There's the door. I'll put a little flash of color right through here. And I'm going to use this in my gray mixture as well. I'll just carry some of this green over. These are just leftovers, mostly sepia. And I notice it's a little darker on top, a little lighter down below. Let these colors run into each other. And let's use a smaller brush here. Let's start to collect a little bit of yellow ochre and cadmium yellow. Tiny bit of my green. The green is Prussian green, mostly this yellow color. And you can see it on the image where the sun is really striking right through here. And I'm going to just basically carry this everywhere that I see the trellis, the overhanging rows. Then I'm going to drop a few touches of my vermilion. Just a little bit of water. And they'll go into a wet zone, wet area. They'll also go on white of the paper here and there. I'll spread some of this out a little bit. What do we think? Is this going to be good enough? That's plenty of roses, I think. Put a little more of this green here. While it's wet, just a little extra green. And I think I'll dry it off from here. All soft edges. All right, painting is pretty well dried. And this next stage is the important stage. It's where we start to define the architectural elements, the form of the tree. It's in creating the shadow. And we have two aspects to the shadow. One is very soft and one is very hard-edged. This one that's falling down is very hard-edged. The one that's climbing up here, cast from a tree that we don't see, this is very soft. So this is, I think, where the fun of the exercise is in creating this variety in shadows. So I'm going to start by wetting this area and starting to create some soft shadows. To do that, I'm just going to use water, but I'm also going to mix up, before I start, my shadow color. That shadow color is going to be taking from the colors that are in the painting. I'm going to use some cobalt turquoise and a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of sepia. It's a cooler shadow, but quite neutral compared to the bright colors that we already have. Well, maybe I'll take a little bit of ultramarine blue here. And I have a little bit of my burnt sienna. This is about the darkness that I want. And you'll notice it's pretty stiff. So then I'll take my big soft brush that just has water with it, basically. I'm going to go over every part of this that I plan to use that wet shadow. So that means all down here, a little bit up through here. Just wetting the area. Well, let's put a little mark down and see if we like it. And by like it, I mean, is it going to spread really fast? Is it pretty? I like this quality actually. So I'm going to use this, just a bit more blue to it. And notice how the shadow kind of climbs here, up the steps, so to speak, and kind of flattens out through here. Climbs again here. Just a little more water. And some nice marks here, kind of climbing the interior of the doorway. Coming up to meet our trellis. And this brush is well suited to create these sorts of marks. Let's let it go a little higher onto our trellis, right about here. Putting that area in shadow. Take some of the color out. I think that's it. We can also, if we wish, spray this and get a little more softness or transparency. I'm just aiming it at this corner here. But when we do that, we have to remember it's going to lighten as well. So soft edges, very, very blurry. Now I'm going to mix up that same shadow color. I'm going to be using a bit more green and turquoise. Ooh, that's a lot of turquoise. Let's add some brown to that. Bit of burnt sienna. And we're going to get ready to paint the more crisp shadow, the sharper shadow that's cast by the trellis. Winds through the leaves. First of all, I kind of want to dry this off, so I'm going to hit it with the hair dryer. I'm going to start with some sharper marks. For example, through the bottom of this door here. One step up, flat, another step up, about here. very hard edges. Very important one right through here. I think it's important because it shows where the door frame meets the masonry. We have another edge here. So painting into the shadows a little bit to get these front steps. Then I'll switch to a very pointed brush, and I'll start to build up the shadow up here. I'm going to start at the top here, and now using small touches, start to work my way down to the shadow area. When it comes down here, we see a lot of leaf type shapes. This is where the brush is very good. Gives us that sort of mark that we want. It's a great exercise to build up an awareness of how edges are going to impact the way we read our subject and how we can guide our audience's eye to rest in certain places or move through certain places. You can start to feel the light on this section. That's where we touched with a lot of the cadmium yellow, if you remember. Green, a little more brown. Green and brown are really nice complements, and I'm using them pretty generously throughout here. Let's go under some of our blossoms. Make them rise above the leaves somewhat. And we continue with a little more sienna. I do that for variation, not because I see it necessarily prominently in the subject, but just to give a little variation to the rich dark that I'm building up here. Go, and now into the shadow. Painting darks into the shadow, we start to make it feel a little more lively. We can see some parts we'd like to preserve, like these little brighter areas. So I'm taking the darks close to that, but not covering everything. Very staccato through here. We can take a little bit of splatter. Particularly nice around the periphery. Okay, good. Next, I want to make it just a bit darker using some dry technique. Darker on this gray. And I'm going to use, what brush should I use? I'm going to use a brush that's kind of beat up. Doesn't have much life to it anymore. And let's take some of our gray here, a little thicker with some white. And let's just try to evoke some dry technique here. Notice how I keep pulling paint out of here. This is to give me a little more of a dry technique. You can hear the difference and probably see it in the area up here. I'm going to return to the wall and start to place a few skinny lines to represent the boards. And we'll use cobalt turquoise mixed with our color here. We have to put a few more shadows over here. We want to drag some lines through these shadows to make them feel a little more transparent. Skinny, skinny, skinny. We have some more descending marks to place over here. We have some holes in the plaster. These are useful for giving some relief, some sense of depth into the wall. We've been depending mostly on texture and shadow, but these can give us more of that depth that we see. Let's go back more to some of our lines here. I'm going to finish creating the leaf pattern. One more dark. I'm using some pretty strong Payne's gray right now into the underside there, building up the shadow color even more, exposing some leaves. Making the light a little more intense. You realize that the the shadows we painted before could have been a little darker, might have been more successful. But we don't really, I mean, we approximate. A lot of what we do is approximation, and we paint it and hope for the best. And whatever happens, yeah, we just roll with it. Sometimes it is surprisingly beautiful. Sometimes it fades. Make sure you leave a lot of spaces in the beginning. And as you're finishing the image, you can make the roses rise up on top of your painting a little bit. I'm going to dry this off, maybe try to restate those shadows once more, just to know if I can do it or not. That's reason enough to try. Maybe we can try one other method. This will give us a little more control. Let me finish off this section first. And the way I'm thinking is to paint some marks here and then hit them with the spray bottle. Shall we experiment, see if that works? I'm always up for experimentation. We'll try that in a couple areas. How about that? Put some mark here, basically painting into those marks that I've placed already, but you realize they're hard edge. Let's see if we can make this work. So now I'm going to take my spray bottle. I don't want to spray this area, so I'll take a piece of paper towel. I'm going to cover this area and then spray this area. And I'm going to watch the marks. I can see them softening on the side already. Okay. You can tell how wet it is here. I'm trying to get some soft edges to those shadows. And I'm going to try a little more color, I think, down here. Doing it this way gives you a little more control than if we wet the page all over again. Try this again. and we adjust it. Well, I don't know if this is going to work. It's about the right intensity. I'm going to throw a little paint. Clearly an act of desperation. Okay. Let's see how that softens out. Maybe okay, but let's see. I'm gonna let it sit for just a moment. While it's sitting, I'll do some little additions up here to my shadows up here. All right, I think it's moved as much as it's gonna move. I'm gonna hit it with the hairdryer. Oops, should look like fuzzy caterpillars climbing up the doorway there. If yours has that appearance, well, success. I'm going to try a little adjustment. Taking some Prussian green here, very light, like a glaze, just going over this green here. And a few more dark touches to the foliage up above through here. For my dark, I'm using Payne's Gray and a little bit of Payne's Gray, a little bit of leftovers, and I'm touching within the darks that are already in place. So the dark shapes are just being made a little darker. We can do that underneath too. Okay, almost there. The values are pretty close. We could wash a little more green on the door. We want a little more pop. Kind of like the splatter on the door or on the concrete. Well, let's take the tape off. And see how edges are working in our subject here. Even though we're using some pretty strong darks in these shadows, because they're soft edge, they're very passive, and especially since we've drawn back into those shadows with some harder edges or some splatter or other identifying marks, they feel transparent. On the other hand, the climbing trellis here feels really, has a strong form. The hard edges are grabbing our attention. We're kind of focused on this bright passage through here, bright leaves. We did make some adjustments. If you remember, I added a bit of green here. That was to make this door feel a little brighter, a little more interesting. I'm still tempted to take, a little bit of this cobalt turquoise, a little white, and maybe come to the bottom of this door and add a couple green marks. Just to make it a little more energetic color-wise. I don't know. Now we softened out those marks. So there's some give and take. The goal here was to play with edges yet again. Soft edges against hard edges, rough edges. So we have a lot of edges happening here, a lot of different types of edges. And it gives us appreciation for how they work in the painting. Greater understanding how we might use them, in future paintings. I just can't stop working on it. Any case, I'm going to dry this off and call it done. In retrospect, I'm glad we returned to these shadows and painted them again. I think that was necessary to get the brightness back in the door. And it's an example of how we can adjust even after the fact. If we want to return to something and adjust it. Even the soft edges, we can do that. This was a bit of an experiment, but something that I'll probably use again in the future.